So, as Tim said, I've been with Quarry Mining now for nearly 11 years, and during that time we've grown from being a small, basically small company that never manufactured their own goods. They subcontracted all of it out, and now to the point where we've got 48 staff. We've got 3 locations around Australia. We do all our manufacturing here in Beresfield, but we primarily manufacture goods which are a highly consumable item. So if you're in that market where you've got the highly consumable items, especially in the mining industry, you're now in a very highly price-driven market. So as a result of those things, over the past 10 years, we have had to, where possible, look for ways that we can leverage off low-cost countries like China for manufacturing some of our rudimentary, either rudimentary processes or some of our products which basically just are too expensive to manufacture here in Australia anymore, mainly because the manufacturing industry has basically shut down that arm of manufacturing. It's just too big now, or it's too niche that it's just not price competitive to continue doing it here. So first of all, I want to actually ask this around the room to everyone here. What comes to your mind when we say we're going to manufacture something in China? What would be people's first thoughts of why you would do that?
Cheap cost.
Absolutely. The first one that comes to everyone's mind is always cost. There is always a lot of other reasons for it, and it always depends on the industry that you're trying to serve, whether it be, in our case, the manufacturing and mining industry, whether you're in a consumer market like clothing or technology like phones or computers or something like that. Those sorts of industries will all have different reasons. All of them fairly confidently can say that cost plays a high part of that. But all the other areas may have other reasons as to why they would do business with China. And there is always benefits of doing business with China or other low-cost countries, and there's also, comes with that, a whole bag of challenges. And you've always got to weigh up whether those challenges are worth the benefits that you get out of it. And what we have tried to do at Quarry Mining is focus on the areas where we can get a high amount of benefit out of it with minimal challenges, effectively so that we can do the things which have the higher amount of challenges, so the really highly technical, really niche items. We still manufacture all of that here, but the rudimentary processes, like just the manufacturing of steel, the basic forging processes that we have to do to steel before we can do these machining operations, we try and push all of that out to China because they're a highly labour-intensive process, and quite frankly, we've only got a very minimal amount of actual companies left in Australia now that actually still do these processes. So we've looked for, where we can, we keep our work here, but what we've actually tried to do is now leverage off those low-cost opportunities that we've got in places like China so that we can keep the smart technology and the smart manufacturing here in this country. So as you said before, the benefits of doing business in a country like China is the low cost. Nearly everything is upscalable. Now, by that, I mean that if you go to a factory or you go to a company, you develop a product with them or a service, and your first order might be 1,000. If you go back to them in 3 months' time and say, this is really taking off, I want 10,000, I've never ever heard of a company over there will say, sorry, we're just not set up for that, we can't do that many. Labour is cheap, so they expand, and they will always expand more and more. We're working with a company at the moment where we're starting off small, and even as soon as when you go there now, they're already prepped and everything's ready in place. So they say, right, you want more? That's not a problem. We can have this machine here in 2 weeks. We can have 4 more employees here in a week after that. We can upscale that, not a problem. Downscaling, however, which comes down to the challenges, sorry, they're all quite small down there, the high minimums. Downscaling is an issue with China. It's always, quite often anytime you're trying to do business with them, they're not very good at doing, I want 1 or 2 prototypes, or I want to explore this idea, but I'm not 100% on it. Can we just make a couple of these first? We'll trial the market, see how we go, and then we'll talk about doing mass production. they're not. That's really not the market for our opinion anyway, and in the industry that we serve, they're not really the right place to be doing that. You've really got to be able to commit to a higher minimum. What are the other benefits? They can nearly make anything. That's not saying they should, but if you go there and you say, I need this done, quite often, because of they know a guy or they've got friends over there who can do this, they will find somewhere or they will tell you, yes, we can do that. They may not do that themselves. And quite often, the people you deal with over there, which I'll get onto later, aren't actually the factories. They favour a system, the brokering system. It's still very prevalent over there. So quite often you're speaking to someone who actually will not do any of the manufacturing process for you. They're just a middleman. The final benefit for our company anyway is the large pools of potential manufacturers. So there's 1.4 million of them. 1.4 billion of them. There is just a vast array of opportunities over there. So if you go to one company and they can't do it right for you, there's always the next company or the next company. So there is always that available to you. That in itself has a lot of other issues that come along with it, because you've got to start this whole relationship process all over again every time you want to go to a new company. But the fact that there is that out there, it does give you that opportunity to explore multiple plan Bs or plan Cs if need be. The challenges, first one, as I said, high minimums. It's what we already previously talked about there. They don't like doing your ones and twos off. They always want to sell you, I want to sell you 500 or 1,000 or 10,000. And you order 500, they'll want to sell you 1,000 the next time around. You order 1,000, they want to sell you 10,000. Quality control. Now, this is actually something where they're getting a lot better at, but they're still a long way behind in terms of in what we would say a westernised process. So we've all got, most companies here will probably fall under manufacturing companies anyway. We have ISO 9001 that they've got a series of standards they need to conform to, that companies look for that ticket when you're submitting it into a contract. If you don't have on there that you conform to a particular ISO, when you weld to this standard, and your material comes from here and you can track everything, if you don't have that, you won't get the work here. That's not so much the case over in China, but they are getting much better at it. And they are very much capable of doing it. It just takes a lot of work, and it takes a lot of face-to-face contact. It takes a lot of constantly checking in. Don't just, whereas here in Australia, you send off a purchase order for a company and say, I want 10 bikes, please. And they say, yes, you'll have that in 3 months. And 3 months later, you have your 10 bikes. As a story about the boat. That isn't the case over there. If you order 10 bikes, a week later, you say, how's my 10 bikes coming along? Are the wheels made? Have you ordered material yet? And you do that week in, week out, and it's the only way to sort of manage quality control, and that over there is just to have constant communication with them. Variability in lead times. Now, I hadn't actually thought about it this way, but after the previous presentation, think about it in terms of whether they actually like you enough, whether they give you the material or someone else. Might explain as to sometimes why we don't always, they say it's 4 weeks this time and 8 weeks the next time, potentially they're selling material to someone else. The variability in lead times is a huge issue over there. One, you've got the variability in shipping times. There's always, you've always got 3 to 4 weeks shipping from most places in China. That doesn't include inland travel. So you could be talking to a company which you think is in Beijing, somewhere near the coast. In actual fact, the manufacturing centre is 6,000 kilometres away in inland China somewhere, and it takes 4 days, 5 days via a truck to get it there in good conditions. In winter, it can take double that. In summer, they can shut down factories because there's not enough power to go around. So you've got this massive variability in lead times. It's something that you need to be aware of, and it's also something that you need to plan for. So you're not planning for getting stuff in a month. You're planning 3 months, 4 months, 5 months down the track. Language and cultural differences. Cultural differences we've already seen. We're nearly the complete opposite. It's a huge barrier to get across. I'll go through later on as to how we sort of tried to manage that and how we tried to get around that. The language issue is another one of these things that is getting better. Kids these days in China, we're finding anyway, are getting, they know English sometimes better than we do, because it is just something that is drilled into their society so much now that we're finding that language barrier is getting better, but there still is always that ability. You can turn up to somewhere, and especially in the more remote parts, which is quite often where the factories are, if you're trying to deal directly with a factory, is that you'll only be speaking to 2 or 3 people there at the very most, quite often only one. And that's a sort of a mixture of English and Chinese. The broker system, I briefly touched on that before. The broker system is a system they absolutely love. So quite often, when you're dealing with China, once again, this is just from our personal experience, is that we're dealing with a company who will then go out and find you a factory who can do something. They'll do all that internal relationships, and it quite possibly it makes a lot more sense to think of it in the way that they have a relationship with 10 or 12 other people or 100 other people, where you go to them and say, I need this steel. And because they're in this market where they're already doing stuff, they know a guy and they can go ahead and do that for you. The brokerage system works well in the fact that it helps you overcome those language and cultural differences, because you're dealing with one person who most of the time is fairly westernised. At least they understand our culture probably better than we understand theirs. However, where it falls apart is you start to get all your eggs in one basket, and you also don't have direct communication quite often with the factory. So if you're trying to make sure that you've got a very highly technical product or something which has got specifications which are very, very tight, it becomes quite hard to actually ensure that happens without having direct contact with the engineers out at site or the purchasing officers out at site who are ordering in the material. You can specify a material of a particular product that you want, and it may turn up that this is a Chinese equivalent, it's okay, when in actual fact, what you need it for, that's not okay. But if you're not having that direct communication with the factory, that can sometimes get lost in translation. IP protection, well, we briefly talked about contracts before, similar sort of boat. It's a grey area. Quite often, what we've found anyway, is with IP protection, it's not actually that much of an issue for us, because when we go to work with a factory over there, they really want your work. They do actually, and they know if you go in through and say, here's our forecast of what we're looking at doing, quite often they're not going to go push out your product to someone else, especially in our industry where we're dealing with very niche products. With our products that we sell, there's only 1 or 2 other companies in Australia that actually do them. So it's sort of, in that respect, it protected our IP in a way. But in another sense, AMEX, you probably would have all seen, anyone who's been to AMEX in Sydney, the Australian Mining Expo that's held down there every 4 years, or 2 years now I think. We went down there in 2009 with a whole range of our wares, and we had a whole bunch of Chinese people coming through, picking up goods, taking photos. 2 years later, we came back and they remembered us. They remembered exactly who we were, and they came up to us with exact samples and replicas of what we had, some of it which was IP protected, and said, here, we made this. We can make this for you. We show you how we can do this for you. So IP protection, it's been fairly safe for us because of the niche market we're in. However, when it really comes down to it, I don't actually know. It's a very grey area when it comes to having contracts over there that actually protect you. So just something to be aware of. Shipping and customs, shipping times, something you've always got to take into consideration. You've got between 18 and 30 days sea freight depending on where you're getting it. If you're air freighting it, yes, you can get it in a couple of days, but depending on what type of product it is now and the weight of it is going to cost you a fortune. So these are all things you've got to take into consideration. Customs can be an absolute nightmare to deal with importing things out of China, and the regulations change so frequently. The biggest thing we can say for that is to hire an expert. So there is plenty of freight forwarding companies available who do this stuff for a living. Yes, you've got to pay for it, but I can guarantee that you will actually save more money by paying them than what you will spend in the way that the laws change, and there may be a different regulation in time that things get kept on docks because you haven't got your paperwork through 100% correctly. So that's a personal experience of ours, is that shipping and customs is a challenge. We just counter that by basically giving it all to paying an expert to do that for us. The geographical issues comes down to the fact that China is, everyone bangs on about how big Australia is. China's about 25% larger again, and they have people everywhere. There's not the sort of part of that land which isn't inhabited. So you could have factories all over the place. So if you can imagine trying to do business with a series of companies in Australia, if we had large-scale manufacturing happening right in the centre, and then some right up in the northwest tip, and then some down in the southeast coast, and if you had to try and travel around to all of them in a week or 2 week period, you can imagine how difficult that could become. So keeping that in mind, that when you're setting up relationships over in China and you want to say, right, I've got these 3 factories that I want to try and get over there and see, that you go, it's only three visits, that's 3 days, maybe a little bit of travel time. You can write off a day in between every one just in travel, trying to get from one place to another. You can fly for 6-7 hours like in Australia and still work well within the same country. So that's worth keeping in mind. The other thing when I say about geographical issues in China is that you've got to be aware of their weather conditions that they have over there. They have down to -20, -30 in winter, and they get up to high 40s in summer. The government can shut down the power to cities because in summer there's too much with the increase in fluctuation of the power. They'll just shut down. Factories just get turned off. So, sorry, we can't produce anything for you for 2 weeks because it's too hot, or we've had to send our workers home because it's too hot. In winter, we actually had one of our factories got shut down because the power lines froze. They could not run the factory for over 2 weeks because the power lines froze and they could not get power to their factory. We don't really experience those extremes here, but they do have all of those. And then to top that off, you can send it to the port, and then a tropical storm can come through and shut the port for 4 or 5 days while this tropical storm comes through. We at least get one of those things happen to us once a year. At least one of our shipments will get held up because of some weather-related delay. And the last one is a potential financial risk. Now, this comes back to the whole idea of contracts, and here in Australia, you say, I want this, and you're generally expecting that that's exactly what you're going to get. And if you don't get it, you're not happy with it, you can go back and you can talk to them and say, look, this isn't really what I asked for. I asked for an iPhone and you gave me a Samsung. Well, okay, yep, fine, you can get a refund. That doesn't really happen that well in China. There is always a chance that you could outlay this money for a particular item and it could turn up and not be what you asked for. It could be different. You could get a tugboat instead of a freight liner. And that is a risk that you have to be willing to take when you do work over there. There is ways to remedy that, which is exactly as our friend did, which was live over there for 2 months at a time instead of coming back every once a year. Come back every 2 months. The way that we sort of counter that is a very similar operation. If we used to spend at least between one of our several staff members to go over there, we'd be there every 2 to 3 months doing a visit, to the point now where we actually have someone who lives there 50% of the time, and we'll do 5 weeks on, 5 weeks off, and is constantly going through these factories to ensure that what we're asking for is what we're getting, and especially trying to catch these issues before they leave the country and before you've outlaid that final piece of money. So why does quarry mining manufacture in China? It sounds weird to say it, but it's actually to keep the Australian manufacturing industry alive. We believe in manufacturing in China for the fact that some of the items that we manufacture over there are very coarse, rudimentary processes, which, because of our because of our culture and our wages and everything else, it is just far too expensive to do that. And if we were to do it, the company wouldn't be alive. It would shut. We couldn't do that. So we do those very coarse and the very rudimentary processes over there so that we can afford to do all the smart manufacturing here. So we've got our workshop has probably in the vicinity of about $15 to $20 million worth of Mazak CNC machines, which we use to do extremely high tolerance parts for all of our mining equipment that we manufacture. Now, we know we can't, we know we definitely can't get that level of tolerance easily in China. It's not worth us trying to do that. So we don't. We will go and say, right, we want the steel, or we want a basic, basically blob of steel turning up that's been forged and made into a certain shape. So then we can go and do the higher level machining to it and get it down to the tolerances that we require, so it actually can be sold and is fit for purpose on the Australian market. Because you just get far too much variability in the Chinese supply. Now, expanding into new markets that require manufacturing processes which are not available in Australia. 20, 30 years ago, we did have a massive manufacturing industry here in Australia because of decisions which were made likely before most of our times. That has actually dropped down quite considerably, and we don't have the same manufacturing industry here anymore that we once did. So we now have to look, if we want to do some of these particular products, we have to look for some of these manufacturing processes overseas because we can't get them done here anymore. So we've expanded new markets over the last 5 to 7 years based purely on products which we couldn't get here, so we bring in the core component which we can't get the manufacturing processes here, and then we do all the value add parts that go with that. So we'll do the smart manufacturing of other components which will work with it to actually make that a better component for the Australian industry. And redundancy. Now, niche manufacturing processes are becoming increasingly rare or unavailable in Australia. That's basically what I was saying about our manufacturing industry has taken quite a big hit over the last 10 to 15 years. The Chinese market offers a large pool of potential manufacturers, so this is coming back to the point of that there is Factory A, Factory B, Factory C, who all have the ability to do some of these same processes for you, which here in Australia, you might be lucky to find one company to do it, let alone turning up at a province, and you've got 10 or 12, 13 different companies that can do it in that province alone, let alone searching throughout the rest of the country. So where I'm going to go from here is just talk about the last 11 years of quarry mining in China, how we've grown from, as I said, being a company which had 4 people, had an extremely low turnover, trying to find our way through when the Australian market started to change, and then how we actually adapted and leveraged off the Chinese low-cost model in order to grow our company to what it is now, what we've learned, what we do differently, and what has changed over that time. So in 2007, we purchased our very first product from China. It was sort of a fairly big thing for us because at that point in 2007, no one really did business in China in our particular industry. Everything was either done locally or done through big global companies like your Sandviks, your Kennametals and things like that, which yes, they operated in and around China, but you would buy it from an Australian company who, you buy it from the Australian arm of their company and not from direct from China. So in 2007, when we first went, we found a Chinese broker company. We did it through Google. All our contact was via email. Surprisingly, actually went well enough, and we still keep in contact with them now, and they're one of our biggest suppliers to date because we have got a very good relationship with them. We've built that over many, many years, and it started purely from an email, which we had no idea how it was going to go. We'd never been to China. We didn't know how to traverse the language barrier or cultural barriers at that point. So we gave it a crack, and that's where we sort of started then. but it was only very minimal. We were talking, you know, a couple of $1,000s here, a couple of $1,000s there. Fast forward to 2009, we, as a company, we had to make a strategic move to move away from using a Sandvik carbide product on our drilling tools, mainly because Sandvik was actually a competitor of ours in that same market. So it just become a bit of a conflict of interest there. So we had to look for an alternative supply of one of our core products, which is tungsten carbide. Now, tungsten carbide is one of the major products which moved away from being manufactured here a long time ago. As of at present, I think 80% of the world's tungsten carbide all comes out of China. There is very few other countries that actually still do all the raw processes of it. There are still factories around the world that still do the final finishing processes on it, but the vast majority of it came out of China. So it was the obvious choice for us to try and look for a Chinese supplier of it. And just by chance, we actually happened to find it through one of our subcontractors who had previously been introduced to an Australian company who had a factory in China. So this was a man born in China, and then he moved to Australia. He's a citizen of Australia, has an Australian company and then a Chinese company as well, manufactures everything, all these products in his Chinese factory, but sells it as an Australian company. So that sort of helped us overcome a lot of originally some of the freight issues and that, because he organised all that for us. And it also helped us having to worry about the financial issues of converting currencies and doing all that. We just did away with that. We bought from an Australian company, and that actually worked fairly well for us in those early days. Following that sort of success and talking more and building a relationship with that company, we in 2010 we actually started using that same supplier then to broker our deals. We'll start to actually look for other products. We were having, at that point in time, we were starting to have a lot of problems with our manufacturing supply chain. We were struggling to get some of our rudimentary processes, because we deal with such a niche market. Some of those processes were actually being done by other companies who also sold them to the same market that we did. So as we started to grow, we were no longer just a small inconvenience to them. We actually started to make an impact on their bottom line, which then also for us became a bit of a disadvantage to us, because then they could then pick and choose when they wanted to do business with us. So we had to start looking for our own alternative way of doing it. At that point in time, there still wasn't a huge amount of manufacturers of some of these processes that we were reliant on in Australia. So we had to look for other alternatives. Because of our relationship that we started to build with our the Australian carbide supplier, we used him to then try and help us broker some of these deals. Now in 2011, we actually really had to find an alternative or redundancy measures of supply, and not only through the one broker that we had at that time, because the main reason that we started to build up a few items, but all through the one broker. But then if something went wrong with that one broker, we had zero redundancy. If that broker would then start to build up quite a catalogue of items of our own, then they could then go to the next highest bidder. So we had that in the back of our mind, of that this is actually going to be can potentially become quite a bit of an issue for us. So we had to start to think ahead and try and figure out how we could actually remedy that by looking for other opportunities or trying to get direct access to some of the factories rather than just dealing with a single broker. That led us to actually starting to attend trade shows and whatever we could. If we could get a meeting with someone in China, we thought let's go over and try and do it. The issue was that presented to us was obviously the language barrier then became very clear, because up until that point we'd always had a translator with us. We'd always had our broker who came along with us, did all the cultural navigating, and if there was a question where we had to ask and try and translate the highly technical stuff, he could do it for us. We're then trying to venture out on our own and go, well, let's try and see if we can go direct rather than basically paying someone a fee in the middle. And that's when the language barrier really started to set in for us. And that all came around because of this trying to avoid the broker system in China. Now, around this same time, this all sort of comes hand in hand, that this is about the time when the mining industry began its decline because of the rapid fall in commodity price. So coal companies at that point then really started to notice price. Prior to that, price was never a problem. They didn't care if it cost $400 or $500 for a part, which it really should only be selling for $100. If they've dealt with company A for the last 10 years, they're going to stick with it because they know they're not going to get let down. At this point in time, this actually worked to our benefit in the fact that we've actually started to build up a bit of a repertoire of being able to do still Australian-made products, that we do all the high-end technical work here, but we're able to leverage off some of those low-cost centres that we had already started to develop, and actually offer a product which was significantly less than what our competitors were offering at the time. So that there, because of that, because coal companies became more price-driven at that point, that was actually a benefit for us that we'd already started to leverage that system. Now, this is one of the, there is a bit of a story with this one. So in 2011, we had a shipment of just raw steel. It was just hexagonal bar we used for a bunch of our drilling products. We had, I think it was around about 15 tonne turn up in Sydney Port, and we got a contact off our Sydney Port saying that your shipment has been grounded. It can't be moved. And upon inquiring as to why, I said, oh, there's a pest issue with it. It turned out there was a singular spider inside one of the crates when they'd opened it that they'd found. And as a result, the entire shipment got pushed to a quarantine zone and fumigated for 3 months. We can't touch it. We have to pay for that. And if you're a small company that's heavily, you've just outlaid X amount of money to have this turn up, and you're expecting to be able to recoup that money in a fairly short window, that hurts. That hurts a lot, especially when they even show you a photo of it, and it is a tiny little spider. And for an Australian, seeing something that small and thinking it's actually going to cause any issues, it was a bit of a hit for us. So that's another one of the issues that you have to be aware of, that because you're importing goods, you have to be aware that coming through customs, all the shipping areas that happen, we have items turn up where they started out in a crate, but by the time they get to us, there might be one plank of wood left and the rest of it's somewhere. You'll find that that packages have been split open, and there may be some left in the bottom of the container. You don't know. You always end up with these little issues just appearing every now and again because of these shipping issues. We actually had one email come through to us off our shipping agent once again to say the boat that your stuff is on has actually partially capsized in a storm and they've lost a bunch of containers. We're not sure if you're one of them yet, but we're just letting you know. At that point, that still then took another month to actually get that ship back to that, to return it back to the closest port, fix the boat and try and either get the gear off or put them onto new ships at the time. So it delayed our shipment quite a bit. Luckily enough, ours wasn't one of the ones that's at the bottom of the ocean. It did make it here. But these are all things that you need to be aware of and basically be willing to risk if you're going to do this sort of business. In 2012, now this happened purely, actually a little bit by fluke. We found the two most respected and experienced manufacturers of hard rock products in China at the time only by attending meetings. Now, we had a relationship with one of these companies. They had actually contacted us and asked us to say, we can supply this stuff. You should come and buy from us. So, okay, yep, sure, we'll go across and have a look at them. And we'd been sort of dealing with them for about 6 months at this point, going to and fro with a couple of meetings. And the managing director of Quarry Mining is a little lady, Kari Armitage, is about 5 foot tall, and she's turning up to a Chinese boardroom as a managing director, which is a massive shock for them to start off with, that there is this female turning up who's basically, she's the owner of this company, they're trying to sell to her. So it's a big sort of cultural thing for them to start off with. And during this particular meeting that we had, they were basically getting what appeared to us anyway, very aggravated that we weren't placing larger orders. We need bigger orders. Why don't you place larger orders? And at that time, we didn't have the market to warrant placing those larger orders. And for some reason, they then actually went on to tell us that only between them and this other company, they're the only two decent suppliers of these products in China. We'd never heard of this other company before. They were in the same province, and we actually organised a meeting with them the following day. And following that point, we never dealt with company A again because of the issues that we had with them and the cultural differences, which basically felt like a bit of an insult at the time to us. Now, I'm sure that that probably wasn't the case, but that is that massive cultural difference that between the way that we were trying to do business with them obviously wasn't working, and it was just by luck that because we were there and we were actually having this meeting face to face, we were there when some of these comments came across about this other company, and we were able to go and find them the following day, sign up some deals with this other company who we still use to date. The lesson we learnt from that is you just cannot beat face-to-face contact, and that works both from the point of view of building a relationship with these people in China, with the companies in China. But the challenge, once again, as we saw with the company A, who we no longer then dealt with, was the high minimums that they want to push for bigger orders, because for the domestic market, that's what they're used to. Because in the domestic market in China, you've got 1.4 billion people, so the tunnelling industry is, tenfold what ours is. So they're used to getting those much bigger orders. In 2012, we began working with other brokers to source like-for-like products to help us gain redundancy for our core products. We started using other brokers which we'd used at that point, which we basically said, well, you do this for us, how about can you do this? We're already getting another broker to do that for us anyway, but let's try and see if we can sort of overlap and have two options available to us, or to do a part order from company A, a part order from company B, to allow us to gain some redundancy. That worked well. It had its challenges once again, because you're now asking a company to do smaller orders rather than doing larger orders. You're now doing twice the amount of work with trying to keep quality assurance up, rather than just focusing on one factory or one client to organise to make sure that the products you're receiving are actually what you ordered. So it does make a lot of extra work, but unfortunately, you always need a plan B in China. You can never just rely, in our personal experience anyway, on doing only business with one particular company. You need to know that you've got something else up your sleeve in case a whole range of issues which may not be company related to for the whole reason that they can't supply for some reason, especially if they're a core product for your industry. In 2012, following increased demand of product of raw materials from raw material suppliers, Quarry Mining began having issues with consistency of quality from our suppliers. Now, when I previously said one of the advantages is everything's upscalable. That's true. However, the upscale of their production compared to the upscale of their quality assurance processes don't always match up. So if you say, I need 3 times the amount I got last month, can you do it? Sure, we can do that. But they can potentially take shortcuts, they can outsource work, they will find another one of their friends who can then go, oh, you can do this as well, can you help me out here and make this happen? So yes, you can upscale your production, but you've also got to be very aware that if you do that in a very short time frame, you're going to have potential issues in that your quality may drop off because you're trying to force them to go faster and they're not set up for that. So you need to, and it's always hard to do to try and forecast out in advance, but working with companies in China, if you foresee that this could potentially be an area of growth, have that conversation with them earlier and try and just keep that try and get a little bit more control, a bit of a plan in place. So if that does happen, at least there is something that you can follow, some sort of path you can follow in that upscale process. And during that upscale process, it is super critical that you are on top of your communication with them. You are visiting as often as you can, because if you turn up and they're saying, yeah, we'll have 3,000 for you next week, and there's 10 over in the corner and there's no raw material, you can probably put 2 and 2 together and figure out that, well, if you're getting another 2,900 from somewhere else, I'm guessing they're not coming from here. because it's taking you 3 weeks to do that. Where's the rest of it coming from? So they're just a few things you need to be aware of when dealing with those sorts of situations. Due to the mining industry decline, many mining companies began consolidating the supply of their products into group supply contracts and began leveraging better prices from their suppliers. Basically, that just means they could get all their mines together, so 5 or 6 mines, and say, we'll give you all of this work, but we need you to do it at a much, much lower rate. Which is great in the fact that if you win it, you get a whole heap of extra work. But to get to that point, you need to make sure that you've got your prices right and your model right, that you can actually sustain that. And the way that we actually did that was through, once again, the higher the turnover of the rudimentary processes gives you more leverage in a market that has a low cost production. So we were able to upscale some of our production in order to do that. But once again, that all has a process and a time that it takes to do that upscale. If you do go from selling 5,000 of something to wanting 20,000 of something, that process doesn't happen overnight. Once again, you need to make sure that you've got those systems in place to make sure that as that upscale happens, when you're with these factories, that upscale process doesn't mean a drop-off in quality. Now, it's around about this same time after the decline hit and and a lot of the mining companies started to consolidate contracts, is that we started to see appearing in our market anyway, a lot of little 1 and 2 man operations who had previously worked or done some work in the industry, or they previously were an underground coal miner or a tunneler, and saw these products and thought, these guys spend a fortune on these things, like we can make millions here. So they go to China, they'll find this one particular product or 2 particular products, bring it back and say, here, I've got all these, I can sell them to them super cheap, and try and win over a group contract based on the fact that they're not doing any rudimentary, they're not doing any processes here in Australia, they're just importing a finished product and trying to sell it on. We started getting massively attacked by only 2 or 3 little clients. One of them actually previously worked for us, who went out and said, right, I can supply these particular drill bits that they once did. I'll get it all manufactured in China, and I can drop the price massively. Bought 20,000 of them, turned up 20,000, and even actually won some work based on the numbers that he put out to in a group contract. Where it fell apart was that because he was a 1 man operation doing all of this, when it turned up, yes, it was 20,000 of them, but 19,500 of them were rubbish and basically wouldn't be accepted by the mines. But at that point, he'd won the contract, so it gave him time to then go back and try and sort out his problems. So he'd already got himself inside the door. So that's one thing you just need to be aware of, that China opens the possibility for small businesses to act large. You can have 1 and 2 man bands, you can have entrepreneurs who can go to China and do these sorts of things. In 2013, a major supplier, one of our major suppliers, moved their factory without really giving us much notice at all. Just, we're just moving our entire factory from one province to another, and it caused huge delays for us. At that point, we already had a lot of supply contracts booked in, so a delay to them by 3-4 weeks is a major thing. A delay to us can be very detrimental to our contracts that we had in place. So we had to do a lot of express freight, so a lot of air freight on heavy items, which cost an absolute fortune. So that once again comes back to that same challenge of shipping and customs because of their geographic location. Around about this same time too, the Chinese government started to put in a huge crackdown on pollution. So many non-state owned steel mills at that time were shut down, because this is around about the time Beijing Olympics. It was around about that time anyway, prepping up for the Beijing Olympics. They started to shut down a lot of non-state owned steel mills because they're a high polluter. And as a result, some of our companies that we worked with bought steel from those companies. And overnight, government came in and said, nope, that's shut. Gone, you can no longer get the material from there, you have to source somewhere else. Of course, they're not the only person who had to do that, so a lot of companies then all of a sudden had to start sourcing materials through state-owned steel mills, which caused massive delays. So this comes back to the whole, when doing business in China, you always need a plan B. Always have another operator, someone who's doing the same process for you at another area, just so that you limit that risk of actually having that overlap where they're both buying it from the same area and it falling apart. It wasn't that factory's fault, but as a result of a decision out of their control, you still don't get the product. 2014, we landed 2 shipments that were worth over $250,000 that failed QA inspection, and the entire shipment had to be scrapped. We couldn't recover basically a cent from one of them. The other one, luckily enough, we had a good enough relationship with the Australian company that we imported, the Australian broker that we imported it through, that we could, but we don't get any of the freight costs back. You don't get the time that you have to spend doing all the QA inspections. So there is that huge potential risk for losing out big if something goes wrong. So that's just something you have to be aware of. We had insurances and things in place, but you all of a sudden you're now behind in your manufacturing process. You've lost out on raw material, etc. In 2015, we began our search for alternate manufacture of critical components. This is when we're starting to grow to a size where we started taking a larger area of the market, and we needed to make sure that we had a higher quality product, or at least a bigger variation in our products, that we could supply a mine in North Queensland and a mine down in Tasmania, because they've got 2 very different drilling considerations that need to be taken into place. So as a result of that, we started to look for other manufacturers who could do this. We sampled samples from over 20 suppliers, and none of them, not a single one, were actually able to pass any QA inspections at that point. A lot of this research was either done through Google or something like that. You don't even know how many of these places actually existed, or whether they were just, once again, buying from other companies. So that was a, yes, large pool of potential manufacturers, but quality control was obviously quite rubbish, and we just could not get the product we wanted in that method. So in 2016, we employed an international sourcing director. Now, I've put that in inverted commas because of that. That was his face. He had a title that said director on it, rather than, he's effectively just he's a manager, he's a guy that we have on the ground over there who does this stuff for us, because he's lived in the country for a long time. But his business card, he has to be called the international sourcing director, so that when he hands it on to the supplier that we're going to, he can then actually have enough face to actually get across the line, actually talk to the right people. So we began the process at that point of sourcing higher level suppliers to reduce our QA non-conformances that we'd had in the past. And that was the huge big turnaround for our good relationships are the key in China. So if you can really make a big focus on those relationships, having him there, constantly going to these factories, was a huge plus for us. Now, at around about the same time, we'd actually asked to start to actually go inspect some of these factories of some of our broker products, which we hadn't done in the past. And they'd always been fairly reluctant to allow us to do that. And after finally agreeing to actually get out and actually have this factory inspection, we found out that we'd been buying products off this company for about 4 years at this stage, for 2 different companies coming out of the exact same factory. One company would get high quality when we did all the testing, the next company would get low quality, but it's coming out of the exact same factory. Now, this isn't a big factory either. This is a factory of 20 or 30 people. We've met them many times, completely failed to mention that, that we'd actually also been buying product from another broker through them. But it wasn't until we had to, in 2016, we had to have Glencore come out and inspect a whole bunch of our factories that we do work with in China for social responsibility and a bunch of other things to make sure that we don't have splash stuff on the front page that Glencore is using child labour in China. So they wanted to go through and check through all of your factories and make sure your quality processes are up and that you're environmentally friendly. It wasn't until we forced that onto them that we found out that 2 of our brokers, all of our eggs were still in the one basket, because they were still buying from the exact same factory, completely unknown to us. So that was where we really had to make sure that we had direct contact with our factories, and we've let that one fail. We didn't follow that through. We were getting good enough quality, so we just let it run. And in the end, it nearly actually came to bite us quite badly with these inspections. As a result of these inspections, one of the new factories we started to do some work with, they rejected one. They weren't entirely happy with their environmental issues, things they had in place, so we had to scrap that, look for another company. That massive supply issues followed that. Following that, we've had a few, over the last year and a half, we've had a few major developments that we've made. One is that because of our relationships we've built in China and our experience, we're now confident enough to go out and look for other alternatives, completely different alternatives. 3DP was one example of that. It's a 3D printing company that we've gone and sourced filament directly from there. So completely different to what we've ever done in the past. We use it quite a lot for our rapid prototyping. Couldn't get supply, so we kind of figured, well, let's source it ourselves. And that is a way that a lot of people are thinking these days, and companies like Alibaba and MadeInChina.com are changing the way the world does business with China, making it much more accessible. And last and not least, this year we've actually now set up a partnership with a Chinese company to begin completing some of our additional rudimentary manufacturing processes in China. Now, that's sort of consolidating some of the stuff we've already got, but also then looking into new markets where we can actually explore new markets in Australia using this factory. But the major focus we had on this was a factory with a correct mindset rather than prior experience. So skills can be taught, however, culture cannot. So if you can get the culture right in the company, then they understand our processes and that what we want, and we can actually then build that relationship with them, we'll be able to get the product that we're after. And then finally, we had to send our staff over to this factory and train them. I sent over two of our younger engineers to go over and train a bunch of people who spoke zero English. We're in the a very northern province of China who have very, very few English-speaking people up there. So that was a big thing for us. But at that point now, because we've got a good relationship with the factory, we did have enough people within that factory that we could do that. But it is a huge change from what we were doing 10 years ago compared to now. We're actually over there trying to train people, and we're willing to take on that language barrier. We've gone from $5,000 orders to over $3 million a year with our raw materials that we're bringing in for our end products. So the few things that we've learned in that time, you can't beat face-to-face contact. That's self-explanatory here and in China, but definitely very much in China. China opens the possibility for small business to act large. When doing business in China, you always need a plan B, so don't always rely on your one supplier. You must request direct contact with the factory. That's not saying you have to buy directly through them. You can still buy through your broker, but you have to get out there and actually see these factories and talk to the people out on site. Good relationships are key to this success in China, and that also comes back with direct access. You get that relationship with the factory, you'll get the product you're after. Skills can be taught, culture cannot. What we do differently, we'd insist on direct contact with the factory from the very beginning. We'd contract an expert freight agent from the start. We didn't do that. We lost a bit of money early on from those issues of importing. Do that from the very beginning, and at least you know how much it's going to cost you. You're not going to have variability there. And employ or contract an agent on the ground to do regular visits to suppliers in their factories, or do it yourself. We did that early on. We flew back and forth quite a bit. Still at that point, that was every 3 to 4 months. It wasn't enough. Lastly, what has changed? China's becoming a more developed country as a result and becoming more expensive. You've got to be aware of that. Yes, your product that you're getting now may be a set price, but be aware that in 18 months, 2 years' time, that price is going to change. They are slowly increasing as they're becoming more and more developed. The general level of quality out of China is also on the rise. There's a big emphasis these days on ISO 9001. How many of them actually follow that, but they all seem to have the little sticker on the bottom of their invoices as a stamp, so that's always nice. And online companies like Alibaba and Made in China are opening up a whole range of new possibilities for anyone to do business in China. So you don't have to be an expert, but it will certainly help you if you've got that experience there behind you. So thank you. Is there any questions that I can answer?
With the broker,
Yeah.
did you sort of find resistance when you wanted to get out there and see the factories?
Absolutely, absolutely. Because, and whether it is, to us it felt like there was a bit of distrust there. Maybe it was just because we asked too early, in that they didn't trust us enough. That If we went out and saw the factory, then maybe we were just going to cut them out altogether. For us, dealing with especially if the factory doesn't have a great deal of people who can actually speak your language, it becomes very hard to do business with them directly anyway. So you're still going to be dealing with the broker. But for us, we had to try and get out there just to make sure that he can translate what we're saying to them about drawings. We can go through a particular drawing because we've got high specifications on some of our products and make sure that exactly what we're asking for is actually what's happening. It's not being lost through a series of communications and translation errors. So yeah, it was very difficult. Persistence, we sort of got there. A couple of them we let slip, and as I said, that was one of the things that nearly bit us quite badly in the end.
How do you find when you went between brokers and buying other parts from different suppliers, the original broker took it?
Yeah, look, with some of the brokers, actually the story of the two brokers who we were purchasing from, who were actually getting it from the same place, they didn't even know. Or one of them, I think one of them knew, the other one didn't. So when that actually happened, you could see there was a huge breakdown, especially between them, because they actually knew each other quite well at that point. And one of them had sort of gone behind his back and done all this business with us. But yeah, trying to then go and say, look, you can't supply what we are after. We've been asking you for these list of requirements and you can't get there. We've had to go somewhere else. They'll still persist, and we still get many companies now who have told time and time again, look, you're just not up to our level of quality. I'm happy for you to send me samples to trial, but until you can actually supply me something which is up to scratch, then we're not going to deal with you. Yeah, it's one of those things they don't take, I think, overly well, and sometimes they don't quite understand why you don't. Their understanding of quality compared to our understanding of quality is very different, but close enough is not good enough in our culture, where it kind of feels like it a little bit is in there. So yeah,
Have you had the challenges of other people, other companies like making your product?
Yep.
Did you have to adapt your product?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So we had to adapt not only our product and the way we sourced our product and how we did it, but also adapt how we worked in Australia. So when we then had to be aware that we were going to have guys turning up on site with a ute full of drill bits which they'd been able to pick up from a Chinese supplier for $3 or $4 each, and they were going to try and sell them to a mine for $6 or $7 each when it costs us 12 or 13 to actually make the exact same product. We had to adapt how we went about that, and we had to focus on our relationships and our services that we could supply here, and we had to focus on the fact that our quality is always there, and then go through generally a whole lot of testing and costing us quite a lot of money to actually then go and get third-party analysis by companies like Bureau Veritas and things like that to actually then prove to them that, look, this is an Australian-made product. We've sourced maybe some componentry, some of it we didn't, some of it was all done completely here, but we've got these components, we've got these products that we've made to a extremely high level because we don't believe in that direct, yes, I can get them to do the entire process from start to finish and import it and then basically just send it straight out at a cheaper rate. Because we don't believe in that, we had to really try and drive that home with our customers, and that was a very big challenge, especially in the peak of the decline, when realistically, yes, your services are great, we like you, you're a great bloke, mate, but I need to buy it off them because they're $2 cheaper. Especially in a product which is selling tens and 20,000s of per year, it starts to add up. So
Payment terms
Mhm.
for the products,
Mhm.
is that very different to what we'd see in Australia as far as deposit up front, that sort of thing?
yeah, so it's pretty much all the deposit up front, with the exception of our broker who actually has an Australian company. He operates on sort of more standardised Australian terms, which gave us a bit of security. But all the other factories, some of them are 100% up front, some of them are 30, some of them are 50. It's one of those things you've got to negotiate with them, and as you build a better relationship with them, they'll be more open to that negotiation. But yes, there's definitely it's very different in terms of payment terms here compared to what it is over there, and that's where you can get stung quite easily too. And there's also that risk factor of I just outlaid 30% of a $100,000 order, and all of a sudden I'm writing you an email and it's just bouncing back saying this doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah.
Where did my money go? So there is always that risk, and it's just something that if you're going to do business with China, you just have to be aware of it, and effectively you've got to be willing to accept that, or put in place insurance policies that will cover that.
Okay, thanks,
Well,
Dylan.
thank you very much.
Appreciate that.